Today we are going to discuss India as a mixed economy, and being a mixed economy would mean that the Indian economy would have features of both the capitalist economic system as well as the communist economic system, or in other words, the free market economic system as well as the centrally planned economic system. So let us discuss those attributes of Indian economy which qualify it as a mixed economy. So the first aspect is economic planning in India. Economic planning means there is some central authority which prepares plans for the whole of the economy, for the whole of the country. Now you would recall that this is an element of a centrally planned economic system, a communist economic system. So India has this feature which is generally present in the communist economic systems. Here we have an institution called the Planning Commission for Economic Planning, and you would recall that Planning Commission started functioning in 1951, and till 2017 12 5-year plans were formulated as well as implemented. And in the first term of the current Modi government, that is in the year 2015, Planning Commission was replaced by Niti Aayog, but still Niti Aayog is also a body which is meant primarily for planning for the whole economy, for the whole country. The only difference being, while the Planning Commission used to prepare 5-year plans, Niti Aayog prepares plans with short, medium and long-term perspective, that is for the 3 years, 7 years and 15 years perspective. Right? So that is the only difference. However, be it the Planning Commission or be it the Niti Aayog, which has replaced Planning Commission, the main task which was performed by both these entities was to prepare plans for the Indian economy, for the country, and this kind of centralized economic planning, which is generally a feature of communist economic system, is one reason why Indian economy can be considered to be having elements of the communist economic systems also. Again, in Indian economy you would find that both the public and the private sector coexist, which means you would find the presence of private capital also, private entities carrying out businesses. On the other hand, the public sector enterprises are also there, which are generally governed by, owned by and controlled by the government. So there is a coexistence of both public as well as private sector. You would recall that as far as the communist economies are concerned, centrally planned economies are concerned, there the public sector enterprises play the dominant role. Most of the businesses are owned, planned and controlled by the government or the central authority, and the volumes of production and the modes of distribution and the quantity of consumption, all these things are also decided by the central authority. On the other hand, in free market economies, you find that most of the businesses are owned by private capital, and government has almost minimal, no role to play in businesses. The only role that the government plays is providing a regulatory framework so that the private capital can carry out businesses. Now, if in India both the public and as well as the private sector coexist, this means that India is having elements of both the free market economy as well as the centrally planned economy. So this is another reason why we can say that India has a mixed economic system. In India, as we can see here, public sector monopolizes atomic energy and railway operations. So you would not find any private capital as far as atomic energy production is concerned, nuclear power plants, atomic energy production refers to nuclear power plants and production. So nuclear power production is carried out by entities which are controlled by the central government. Again, railway operations in India are carried out by the entities owned by the central government. So in these kind of sectors you find that there is no private capital. These kind of sectors are dominated by, monopolized in fact, by the public sector, which means you have no other private player offering these kind of services or engaging in these kind of activities. Please don't confuse railway operations with construction of railway wagons. Railway operations means deciding the route chart, deciding the timings, and actually making the railway wagons ply on the track. So as far as railway operations in India are concerned, it is managed by Indian Railways, which again is under the direct control of Government of India. In fact, we have a Ministry of Railways, right? So railway operations are monopolized by public sector. However, in India, as far as the construction of railway wagons is concerned, now we see that private players are being encouraged to build railway wagons, and we have had coaches for metro trains from manufacturers in the West also. So the manufacturers in the West have supplied us coaches for railway wagons in many of the metros which are functioning in different parts of the country, including in Delhi and Bangalore. So we are not referring to construction of railway wagons, we are basically referring to the operations, and as far as operations are concerned, this is monopolized by the public sector. On the other hand, we have presence of private sector in consumer goods industries. For example, you would not find any government owned firm or a public sector organization producing toys. You would also not find a PSU producing chocolates. So these are the sectors in which you see that the private sector, the private participants, the private capital has taken the lead. In fact, no public sector organizations are present in these kind of sectors, and these sectors have been left open for the private capital. So both public as well as private sector are present here in India. They coexist, and while in consumer goods industries the private sector monopolizes them, public sector monopolizes the areas like atomic energy production and railway operations. There are services like health services, education, banking. These are those sectors in which both the public as well as the private capital is present, which means some of the entities in these areas, in these sectors of the economy, they are owned by the government, while the others are owned by private entrepreneurs. For example, let's take of health. On the one hand, we have district hospitals and primary health centers and community health centers around you. You would find these kind of setups around you. These are basically owned by the governments. On the other hand, we have got private hospitals, private dispensaries, and private nursing homes also. There are so many business conglomerates like Fortis, like Max, which have been running private hospitals also. So these are those sectors in which both private as well as public capital is being used. Again, education, we have got private universities also, and we have got universities like Kuma University, which are owned by the government, which are owned and, let's say, financed by the government. Again, in banks, we have got the private banks also, and we have got public sector units also. Coal mining has only recently been liberalized, and private firms can also mine coal. As far as steel production is concerned, on one hand we have got Steel Authority of India Limited, which is a public sector organization. On the other hand, we have got Tata Steel, which is a private organization. Likewise the case for oil refining. we have got Indian Oil Corporation. On the other hand, we have got Reliance Industries. Telecommunication, we have got BSNL and MTNL, which are public sector organizations in this particular sector, while we have also got companies like Vodafone Idea, Airtel and Reliance Jio. So these are the sectors in which both the public as well as private control exists, and this is again another feature which makes India a mixed economy, the coexistence of both public as well as private sector, or the coexistence of both public as well as private capital. Now in India there is a lot of encouragement also for the private sector. The reason is very simple. The government has understood that it is just not possible for the public sector organizations to create all the jobs which we need every year. We need almost a crore of jobs, more than a crore of jobs to be added everywhere, because we have to cater to the demand of our rising population and cater to the growing number of educated individuals entering the job market. And this is just not possible for the public sector organizations. Again, it is also not possible for the public sector organizations to produce all kinds of goods. For example, it's just not possible for them to produce all the toys, all the lipsticks, all the chocolates that people here in India needs. So naturally there has to be some encouragement given to private sector so that they can fill up the gap in these areas of the economy. And that is why there is a lot of encouragement to the private sector, including tax breaks and incentives. For example, when Uttarakhand came into being as a new state, the private entrepreneurs wishing to set up their production plants in Uttarakhand, they were offered various tax breaks and incentives. Again, another example is backward area subsidy, which is given to those firms which set up their production plants in backward areas, right? So these kind of tax breaks and incentives are given to private sector so that the private sector can grow and so that it can provide more jobs to the unemployed youth of the country, plus it can produce items which are required by the domestic market. Again, another example of encouragement to private sector is a scheme like Make in India. Make in India is basically trying to attract private capital, be it from within the country, which means domestic firms, be it from outside the country, which means foreign firms, to set up their production plant here in India and to produce various goods. So this is another kind of a scheme which has been rolled out to attract the private capital. And we have also seen gradual privatization of erstwhile PSUs. For example, Maruti Udyog, which started as a joint venture between Government of India and Suzuki Motor Corporation, was later on privatized and it was actually sold to Suzuki Motor Corporation, which now is the owner. Balco, PSU producing aluminium, was sold to Sterlite Industries. Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited, VSNL, was sold to Tata Teleservices. So we have also seen gradual privatization wherein government has sold its stake in various businesses to private partners or to private players. So all these things basically point out to the encouragement which is given to the private sector, and this, you would recall, is an element of the free economy system, free market economy system, wherein private sector is encouraged and private players are encouraged. So this particular aspect of the Indian economy brings it closer to the capitalist kind of an economic system or a free market kind of economic system, right? While the economic planning that we have discussed in the first place, right at the top of your screen, that was an element which was bringing the Indian economy closer to the communist kind of economic systems or centrally planned kind of economic systems. Now let us take some more examples. Here in India there is no fundamental right to property. In fact, when initially the constitution was enforced, at that point of time right to property was included as a fundamental right, and however this particular aspect of the Indian Constitution was amended later on, and now right to property is no more a fundamental right. Right now, this is an element which brings Indian economy closer to the communist kind of economic systems, centrally planned kind of economic systems, wherein there is simply no or minimal rights to property. And we have discussed this in the last video session as well. So this is one element which is taking us closer to being a communist kind of economic system. But then we have also got various laws for regulation of work conditions for the workers. For example, Factory Act, it prescribes the work conditions like hours of work in a day, number of breaks and what should be the duration of the break, what all amenities should be present in a particular factory, for example toilets and for example washrooms, toilets, whether or not it is mandatory for a factory to have an ambulance. So all these things are basically mentioned in the Factories Act. Industrial Disputes Act basically mentions the process to be adopted to resolve the dispute between the management and the workers, how strikes can be organized, or how the management, if they feel that there is a problem, they can terminate the services of an employee. All these things, all these procedures have been actually described in Industrial Disputes Act. Again, Minimum Wages Act prescribes the minimum wages that have to be paid to the workers. So these regulations basically are there to protect the interest of the workers against exploitation by the management. Again, we have got wage boards. Wage boards, basically these are tripartite bodies which have basically representation from the government, and then we have got representation from the management, from the employers and from the workers. So basically there are three parties involved: the government, the management or the employers, and the third party involved is the workers. And these are set up on a regular basis so as to fix the wages that should be paid to the workers in these factories and establishments. So again, these wage boards are basically set up to safeguard the worker interest against exploitation by the management of the firm. Again, we have another aspect which is called the workers' participation in management, wherein workers contribute to the management of their organization. So the management of the organization is just not left to the top management, it is also how the organization has to be run is also decided by workers along with the management. For example, how to improve the quality of a product, or let us say how to reduce the defects in a product. For example, if this particular question has to be answered, many a times worker groups are formed. These groups are basically called quality circles, and since they are the ones who are working on the product and they know how to get rid of the quality defects and how to improve the quality of the product because they are working at the shop floor. So what happens is the management invites these workers, forms a group of these workers to work on these quality aspects and to give suggestions to the management. These kind of groups are basically called quality circles, and you'll be studying about these quality circles in production management also. So these quality circles, they are basically a form of management, workers' participation in management. They are a way in which workers can participate in management, because the suggestions which are given by these quality circles, they will be implemented by the management, and this will ultimately improve the quality of the products, and it will ultimately also reduce the defects in the products. So basically something which has to be done by the management now has also been done by the workers. They have basically driven the changes in the organization so as the organization can improve the product quality, output quality. So this is an example of workers' participation in management. Again, for example, where all the toilet should be placed, how many toilets should be there. These kind of management issues, they are many times solved by inviting the workers to give suggestions, and based on the suggestions the management actually provides these kind of facilities to the workers. This is another example of workers' participation in management. You would also be studying about this in the human resource management and industrial relations subjects, right? So all these things have been basically done. The crux of the matter is that all these things have been basically done to ensure that the workers are not exploited, because when you have workers on the one hand and the management on the other hand, the management is always going to be powerful. They can always hire some other worker because there is so much demand for jobs here. There are so many people in the labor force, so the management is always powerful. They can always terminate the services of one employee and they can hire the other employee. So in this sense, management is always going to be a more dominant entity than the workers. And just to create a balance in this relationship between the workers and the management, government has come up with these kind of regulations, these kind of laws, so that the workers and their interests can be protected, and they can be protected against any undue exploitation by the management of various businesses. So now this again, the main point now is, up till now I was just describing all these aspects. The main point here is that now this is an element which is generally found not in free market economies, but in command and control economies, but in planned economies, but in communist economies. So now these two features which we have discussed on this particular screen, no fundamental right to property and regulation of work conditions, they again will bring India closer to communist kind of economic systems, or command and control kind of economic systems. Again, so these are the other features of the Indian economy. For example, subsidies are provided to weaker sections of the society. What are the various types of subsidies that are provided? This is just a small list. There are so many other kind of subsidies which are provided not only to the weaker sections but also to the relatively less weakers, relatively more privileged sections of the society also. For example, food and fuel subsidies there. You know that the Target Public Distribution System, TPDS, provides subsidized food to poor sections of the society. Wheat, rice, pulses, sugar, kerosene, these kind of products, these kind of edible items are provided to the poor sections of the society through the ration shops, the PDS shops, and they are provided at a very subsidized rate, right? So again, we also have this provision of fuel subsidy wherein the LPG cylinders are subsidized for use by relatively less privileged sections of the society. And now you would recall that around 2-3 years ago, Government of India also launched the Ujjwala scheme, which was basically to provide LPG cylinders, cleaner fuels to those households which were basically dependent on firewood to cook their food. So all these subsidies are being provided to weaker sections of the society so that the inequity which is there in the society can be corrected. The inequity between the haves and the have-nots, the ones who are very rich and the ones who are very poor, that can be corrected. These subsidies are targeted subsidies, which mean that they are not provided to every single individual, every single household in the country. They are targeted to only those households which are relatively poor. So income is one criteria depending on which you would be given food or fuel subsidy. For example, the food subsidy to below poverty line families, below poverty line households is much more than the food subsidy to above poverty line households, right? Again, fuel subsidy is provided only for limited number of cylinders. It is not provided, it is only provided to domestic cylinders meant for domestic use. It is not provided for cylinders meant for commercial use, on for example in restaurants. So they are all targeted subsidies so that they only reach the weaker sections and they are not wasted on the relatively more privileged and richer sections of the society, right? So the main idea is to create an equity, to correct the imbalance because of different level of incomes in the two sections of the society by providing additional facilities at no or very minimal cost to the poorer sections of the society, right? Again, we have this example of PM Kisan for small farmers, which was introduced in the year 2019. Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, rupees 6,000 was to be paid to every farmer. At that point of time, the provision was having land less than 2 acres. So that was the provision at that point of time. However, this has been changed now. However, the whole point is that the Kisan Samman Nidhi was being provided, rupees 6,000 was being provided to these households in 3 different installments so that they may have some more money to fulfill their basic needs. So this was an income support scheme meant only for small farmers, and this was not meant for richer section of the society or for those who are engaged in some other kind of activities. And the reason why this particular scheme was brought, that agriculture and cultivation is not bringing sufficient remuneration to the farmers engaged in these activities. It is not sufficiently remunerative. Many a times farmers have to face various risks. Many times the yield is not good because of inclement weather or because of some other reasons. So there is an effort to support the farmers. Again, basically the whole objective is to support the weaker section of the society. Again, we have got old age pension schemes wherein pension is provided to people above the age of 60 years. There are schemes to provide pensions to widows also above 40 years of age. There are also schemes to provide pensions to people who are physically disabled. So all these schemes have been brought in to help the weaker sections of the society, to help alleviate their sufferings, to help them improve their standard of living. Now this is again a feature of the communist economies, wherein the central authority tries to ensure that the living standard is almost the same throughout the society. So this is again a feature of the centrally planned economic system or a communist system, which means that India, as far as these 3 aspects are concerned, no fundamental right to property, regulation of work condition, and subsidy to weaker sections of society, India is relatively closer to the communist economic systems if you look at three aspects. However, we have looked at the earlier aspects also, for example encouragement to private sector, and the second one, which is the coexistence of public and private sector, which tell us that India is also showing elements of being a free market economy or being a capitalist economy. So we can conclude that since elements of both the free market economies are present in India, as well as elements of both the free market economy as well as of the communist or the centrally planned economy, both of these elements are present in the Indian economy, that is why we can conclude that India is a mixed economy. However, as I said in the last discussion that we had, India is slowly leaning towards capitalism. It has been moving, though at a very gradual pace, from being more inclined towards the communist kind of economic system to now being closer to a capitalist kind of economic system. So in other words, we can also say that there is a movement from left to right. I hope you remember what left means: communist kind of economic systems. Right means the capitalist economic system. So there is a gradual shift from left to right, and which is pronounced in aspects like privatization of many public sector units. For example, Hindustan Machine Tools factory in Haldwani has been closed down around 4 years ago. So now this is showing a gradual shift in the capitalist towards the capitalist kind of economic system, but still India is a mixed economic system because of the presence of all these 6 elements that we have discussed in this particular discussion. Thank you very much.